Hello everyone, it's the War Hipster here, coming at you with another painting tutorial, and today we are painting an epic miniature. We are painting Uriel Ventris, rendered in plastic for the first time, and he looks amazing, and he's a really cool model. Loads and loads of cool backstory, you should go and check it out, but enough rambling because we're going to jump right in and start painting him. Now he has been primed in Grey Seer, as I'm sure you can tell by now, and what we're going to do is we're going to start work on all of that armour. Now the colour that we're going to make is a roughly 1-to-1 mix of contrast medium and Talassar Blue. This is going to act as our pre-shade for all of our armour. And what we want to do is we just want to start getting this all over all of that blue armour, just like this. There's not a lot of science to this part. We want this to be a reasonably smooth coat though, so do just take your time. Try not to overload any of these areas with the Talassar Blue. If you do get a little bit too much on there, just make sure you catch it quickly and just pull it off with your brush. Now the reason we're doing it with a 1-to-1 is because Talassar Blue on its own is very vibrant, and it's a lovely colour, but we don't want it to be just pure Talassar Blue, because if it's that pure Talassar Blue, it gives us a very lovely colour, as I already said, but it then makes, when we come to put the Ultramarines Blue on, a little bit too dark, so we just want to kind of avoid that. So that's why we use the contrast medium. The contrast medium will also help by improving the flow of your Talassar Blue, making it a little bit easier to work with, particularly on areas such as these leg grooves, which are quite flat and open. Don't worry too much about getting this on the trim or on the icons on the greaves, because we are going to be going over those with a metallic paint. It doesn't matter too much if we cover them in contrast for now. The main concern here is just making sure that we capture all of that blue armour. And so with that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to use some Ultramarines Blue over the top of that Talassar Blue. We just want to go a little bit more steady here, because we want this to be a nice smooth coat over the top. just like this. Just kind of always taking it a section at a time. Just kind of using medium amounts on my brush, which I know can seem like a fairly pointless thing to say, but it's not like don't take too little, but also don't take too much. Basically don't want to look at your brush and it look like it's kind of dry, but you also don't want to look like there's kind of a drip forming. That's the sweet spot right there. So with that Ultramarines Blue applied, we've now got a lovely, perfect Ultramarines colour for our armour. Now if you did make some mistakes, you can go over it with a glaze of 10 parts contrast medium to 1 point Macragge Blue just to smooth it out, but actually I haven't got any, which I'm really pleased about, so I'm not going to be doing that in this stage. But if you want to see that in action, you can go and check out the How to Paint Ultramarines Intercessors, How to Paint Ultramarines tutorial that's available on the channel now. Anyway, what we are going to do is we're going to start highlighting all of that blue armour, and the colour that we're going to be using is some thinned down Calgar Blue. Now this is quite a subtle highlight, but this is just so that we get some consistency in those edges before we add any kind of sort of like spot highlights and things. This just works as the base for all of those armour plates, like that. So you just want to go around picking out all of the edges. It might seem a little bit daunting, but there aren't actually loads on Ventris because he's got a lot of kind of gold fanciness around the edges of his armours, so just use your box art. Once you're finished, we'll come back. And with that Calgar Blue all applied, what we now want to do is we want to take some blue horror and we want to pick out things like the rivets and any of the corners of those blue armor panels. Just like this, just to give it a little bit of a spot highlight. Give it that impression of the light catching off of those armor panels. Like that. So with that blue horror applied, you can see the light's just catching off of those blue armor panels and it looks lovely. So what we're going to do is going to move on. We're going to start painting some of the other base coats, and the first one that we're going to work on is all of the black details. There's not a lot of these. It is in fact just the soft joints in his armor and the casing on the bolt gun. And the color that we're going to use for this is of course Black Templar. What we want to do is just want to start whacking it on there. Just like this. Simple. And so with that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to work on his cloak. Now, there's two different methods here. We've got the inside and we've got the outside, because the inside is kind of like a thinner, more kind of pale green, whereas the outside is a kind of really dark, rich green. So we're going to start working on the inside of the cloak first, and the colour that we're going to use for this is Creed Camo. What we want to do is just load up our brush with a fair amount, and we just want to kind of tilt him all the way up like this, negotiate our brush up in there like that, make contact with the model, and just start pulling that Creed Camo all the way down. Like this. Just making sure we get it all covered. And with that done, just before we finish it off, we're just going to pop some colour on that back piece, well, the back of the cloak, the outside of the cloak. The first colour we're going to be using for that, though, is Warp Lightning. Now, the application is broadly the same as it was for the inside. You just want to go all the way up here and just pull it down in these nice big broad brush strokes. Trying to get a really smooth, even finish. And so with that done, what we now want to do, we're going to grab some Ork Flesh. We're going to use this on both sides of the cloak, but we're going to use it very differently. So on the inside, what we want to do is we're going to just take a small amount of Ork Flesh, like this, not very much at all. And then just in the deepest recesses of our cloak, so we've got this here, we just want to start adding a little bit of this Ork Flesh in there. Just like that. So we're leaving that Creed camo shining through at the top sides. Like so. Just like that. Whereas on the back, what we want to do with our Ork Flesh is we want to go all over the outside of the cloak in much the same way we just did with the Warp Lightning. What we can also do with this Ork Flesh at this time is paint in the trim on his shoulder guards. And next up, what we're going to do is we're going to take some Akhelian Green. I'm going to use this in the recesses on the back of the cloak. So for example on this one here, just take a small amount and just run it down that dark area. Like that. Similarly at the top. Just like that. And so with that done, what we now want to do is we want to take some Nurgling Green. We want to use this to highlight the sharp edges of the inside of the cloak. And similarly on the back of the cloak, we want to highlight all of the sharpest areas with some Sybarite Green. Just like that. And so with that done, our cloak is pretty much finished. We've just got to do these little Aquillas, but we're not going to do them just yet. We're going to do them a little bit later on when we do the rest of the white details. So what we are going to do before we do that, however, is we are going to use some Moot Green. I'm going to use this to highlight his shoulder guards. Just like this. And so with that done, all of our greens are now finished. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on. I'm going to paint in some of the other details. And this is going to include things like the leather, first of all. So the colour that we're going to be using for that is Cygor Brown. All we want to do is just want to take some of this on our brush and just start painting it all over areas like these pteryges, or his tabard. There's a little bit of his belt poking through. And of course his weapon holster. Just there on his hip. And with that done, just before we highlight all of that leather, what we're going to do is we're going to rattle through a few more of the base coats, just so we get him sort of looking a little bit more finished before we then go back and do the rest of this stuff in one big highlighting party. So the first colour that we're going to use is Retributor Armour, and we're going to be using that for all of the gold. Now there's a lot of gold on Mr. Ventris, so I recommend thoroughly that you check out your box art to figure out where to place it. Essentially, you just want to take your time here, making sure you capture all of that gold detail. Just be really careful around all that blue and green. And with that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to use some thinned down Iron Warriors to paint in all of our silver details. And next up, we're going to use some Skeleton Horde for all of his purity seals. He's got 3. He's got the one here on his pauldron, he's got one on his leg, and one on his cape. And next up, we're going to use some Volupus Pink. I'm going to use this on the wax seals, on the purity seals. I'm going to use it on the soft grip of his sword, and we're also going to use it on the ropes coming down from his backpack. You can see them here. And with that done, what we now want to do is we want to take some thinned down Corax White, and we want to apply this over the top of any of the details that we want to be white. So areas such as this old teamer here on his shoulder, and we've got the rose on his other shoulder pad, as well as the little Aquillas here on the cloak. And next up, we're going to use some Apothecary White over the top of those white details. Just add a little bit of shading into them. And so with that done, we're just going to leave the head just for now. What we're going to do is we're going to add some shading to the rest of those details that we need to add shading to, so the metallics, and then we're going to do all the highlights, and then we're going to do the head and the hair last. So the colour that we're going to use first is Fyreslayer Flesh, and we're going to be using this on all of the gold. So you just want to get a good coat of this all over all of those gold details, like this. Being really careful now around anywhere where we don't want Fyreslayer Flesh to suddenly appear. So for example, over the top of that lovely blue armour that we've got. And next up, we're going to use some Basilicanum Grey to shade all the silver details apart from the sword blade. So we just want to leave that blade alone just for the moment. We do want to get this Basilicanum Grey all over the rest of the silver. So there is a little bit of silver here on kind of the hilt area. So we do want to get some on that. but we don't want to put any on the sword blade itself just yet. I'm going to shade that slightly differently. And with that done, what we're going to do now is we're going to take some Gryph Charger Grey. I'm going to use this to shade that sword blade. Just like this. And with that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to take a 1-to-1 mix of Contrast Medium and Basilicanum Grey. I'm going to add a kind of shimmering blade effect over the top of that silver. So we take a small amount of this Basilicanum Grey mix, and what we're going to do is we're going to make contact around about halfway of the blade, so around about there. And we just want to pull this Basilicanum Grey along the flat of the sword, like that, just up to the edge, so just along that front third. And similarly, where that kind of ends, we then want to do on this third as well, like that. So we've kind of got a quartered blade at that point, like that. And then similarly, once again with the same mix, 1-to-1, Contrast Medium to Basilicanum Grey, we take some on our brush, and just a little bit further in than where we did last time, we had another layer like that. And like that. And then for a third time, a little bit further in once again, just going to add another one of those 1-to-1s of Basilicanum Grey and Contrast Medium, just like that. Just like that. And so with that done, what we're now going to do is we're going to highlight all of those silver details, including the sword blade, with some Iron Hand Steel. And next up, what we want to do is we want to take some Stormhost Silver and want to apply this to the tip of the blade and just bring it down a little bit like that. Similarly on the top side as well. And we want to use a little bit of it going down the center at the tip of the blade like that, just to make it look nice and sharp. And next up, still sticking with that sword, what we're going to do is we're going to use some Grey Seer to draw in some little lightning strikes coming off of those power nodes. Like that sort of thing. It's a very subtle little effect, but I'm just going to add a couple more. And then we'll come back. And next up, we want to use some Corax White to highlight those lightning strikes as well as the tips of the nodes. Like that. And then just on the lightning strikes themselves, just add little bits of Corax White wherever our freehand design kind of intersects with each other. So for example, I've got a little one here. Just gonna add a little bit of Corax White just there on that little tip like that. And so with that done, what we're then going to do is we're going to make a roughly 8 parts contrast medium to 1 part Talassar Blue mix, so that it's really, really thin. You can see kind of on my thumb, it's very, very, very thin. So what we're going to do is we take a small amount of this on our brush, not very much at all, a little too much there, and then we're just going to colour over the top of our lightning. Just like this. You just put it out a little bit. Like that. And with that done, our sword blade is now finished. So now we can move on and start painting in the rest of the details. And the colour we're going to be using is Liberator Gold. And we're going to be using this to highlight all of the gold. And next up, just to finish off that gold, what we want to do is we want to take a small amount of Canoptek Alloy, use this on the sharpest corners of all of our gold details. What we also want to do is we want to use this Canoptek Alloy to colour in the shiny gem on the sword blade like that. And next up, we're going to use some Mournfang Brown to highlight our leather details. And next up, we're going to use a tiny amount of Gorthor Brown, just on the sharpest corners, as a little spot highlight. And next up, we're going to use some Corax White to highlight all of our white details. And next up, we're going to use some Screaming Skull to highlight all of his parchment. And next up, we're going to use some Fulgrim Pink. This is going to be to highlight all those areas that we did with the Volupus Pink. So areas such as our purity seals, the sword wrap, and the ropes on his backpack. Just like that. And next up, we want to use some Administratum Grey to highlight the sharp corners of all of our black details, as well as any rivets that you might have. And with that done, what it's now time to do is work on his face. Now, something to point out about his face is you've got his shaved scalp just here. Now that looks like hair, but it's not. It's going to be shaved hair, which is going to be a different colour entirely. But we are going to colour over it with the same colour that we're using now, which is Guilliman Flesh. So we just take our Guilliman Flesh on our brush, and we just very carefully start applying this all over his skin. Now I want to go reasonably quickly here, just so we can avoid getting any lines and streaks where we really don't want them, which will happen if the paint dries if you take too much time doing this. Similarly, just mop up any excess you don't want with the brush. And what you want to do, as I said, you do want to just bring this Guilliman Flesh all the way around over the top of that shaved scalp, because only that top part of it is hair. So I'm going to leave it down here. Just make sure you get that little bit just there. So with that done, what we now want to do is we want to make a roughly 1-to-1 mix of contrast medium and Basilicanum Grey. Once again, just like we did with the sword, we want to take a small amount of this on our brush, and we want to just build this up over the top of his hair at the back here. Just like this. What we can also do, once we've just done that, is we can also use this Basilicanum Grey mix to add in a little bit of stubble around his chin and the bottom of his cheeks as well. Now, it might take a couple of layers. I think I'm going to do 2. So I'm going to let this dry. Just once I'm happy with it. So with it done once, we're now going to just do it again, but we're just going to be a little bit more concentrated about how we apply it. So you just want to add the second bit of Basilicanum Grey towards the top, closer to the hairline, like that. So you see it gets a little bit of a fade up, whereas on the chin, you just want to kind of do this in reverse. So you just want to do this towards the bottom. Like that. And so with that done, what we now want to do, we want to pick out all of the raised and sharpest areas of his skin with some Flayed One Flesh. Just like this. And next up, we want to use a tiny amount of Volupus Pink. I'm going to use this in 2 ways. One, you just want to put a little bit of this into the middle of his scar like that. We also want to just add a little bit of this Volupus Pink over his lips. Just a small amount. Like that. And with that done, what we now want to do is we want to take a teeny amount of Wyldwood. Not very much at all. Just on the tip of your brush. I'm using an Artis Opus Series M, size 000 by the way. But we want to take this Wyldwood, and we want to add that underneath his eyelids. Just like that. And next up, we want to use a small amount of Wraithbone to colour in the whites of his eyes. Like that. And next up, we want to use a tiny amount Black Templar. We want to add a little dot right in the middle of his eye. Like that. And so, still sticking with the Black Templar, what we're going to do is we're going to paint in his hair. Just like this. Just being really careful. Around all that skin that we've painted in now. And with that done, I've also added some Black Templar just over these service studs up here, which, you know, I should have explained last time, but I didn't. But before we do anything with them, what we're going to do is just going to highlight his hair with some Administratum Grey, just picking out the strands. Just like this. And with that done, what we then do is take a tiny amount of Iron Hand Steel, just add it as a dot to those service studs. Just like that. And so with that done, we've just got a couple of details left to do. And one is this shiny gem in his sword hilt. So what we're going to do is we'll work on that next. And the colour that we're going to use first is Blood Angels Red. And because we highlighted it with Canoptek Alloy a little while ago, you're going to see that it's already nice and bright. And next up we take a small amount of Wyldwood, and in the top left corner, so this kind of area here, just want to add a small amount of this over the top of our gem. And kind of like a oval shape like that, just add a little bit of shadow to that gem. We're effectively leaving a shiny metallic red down the bottom side of it. And next up we use a small amount of Fire Dragon Bright just around the edge of our red section. Just like that. And next up we add a tiny little dot of Corax White just here inside our darker brown section. Like that, just to give it the impression of the light shining over this gem. So with that gem done, what we now want to do is we want to take a tiny amount of Cygor Brown. Now this is completely optional, you don't have to do this, but what we are going to do is we're going to add some tiny little lines of script on each of our purity seals. Just like this. With the script on that purity seal finished, all that's left to do is to paint in his base. Now, the colour that we're going to be using for this is Runelord Brass. And all we want to do is we just want to start coating this paint all over like this. It might take a couple of coats just to make sure it's a nice strong finish. We want to get this all over this floor that he's standing on. And with that done, we're going to create a roughly 6 parts contrast medium to 1 part Wyldwood mix. And we're going to use this to shade over the top. I've actually got a little too much on my brush. Take some of that off. We're going to use this to shade all of that Runelord Brass. Just like this. And so with that done, what we now want to do is we want to use some Sycorax Bronze to highlight the edges on our floor panels. And next up, I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Nihilakh Oxide just around some of these rivets. Just add a little bit of oxidization, a little bit of weathering. And with that little bit of Nihilakh Oxide added, our base is now finished, and so is Uriel Ventris. All that's left to do is to paint in the rim of the base. Now, the box art does say to do it in a brown, but I much prefer a black, so I'm going to be using some Corvus Black to do this. So I feel like it makes him a little bit more displayable, or display miniature type. But obviously, you can do this whatever colour you like. And there we have it. Our fourth captain of the Ultramarines, Uriel Ventris, is finally finished. And it's a pretty big milestone, this guy getting a plastic model. It's been a long time coming, I think. He's been very, very popular. He's a really awesome character. He's deserved a plastic miniature for a very long time, and he's finally got one, which is awesome. It's very reminiscent for me of the kind of Horus Heresy design. I don't know what it is about him. He just kind of, he feels like the Forge World Guilliman model to me. It's just really unique and it looks amazing. Just looking at it spinning there, but just next to the other heroes, it looks really, really great. And I've really, really enjoyed painting this one for all of you. If you enjoyed this one and you'd like to support me further, like these legends on the screen, you can do so. Head to patreon.com/warhipster or head to ko-fi.com/warhipster. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all of that good stuff. And if you'd like to stay up to date, make sure to click the bell icon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.